Hello and welcome to our 6th week of Future Punk. Today the topic Future Dialectics might at first seem even more esoteric than the other topics. However, it has a very good cause why I put it in. I mean, if you think of the layout of the course, the idea is that we take all these super serious and businessy tools of strategic foresight, of future studies, of speculative design, and repurpose it and mix it together with science fiction, with other forms of writing, art and poetry to create our own visions of futures. So, and dialectics is another compartment in our toolbox that is, I think, not as widely discussed, although there was a time in the 1970s and 80s when it was quite in fashion. So I found this book in a very nice paper by the Finnish futurist Tuomo Kuosa, where he argues that we should use more dialectics. So, and he says why. So we should use dialectics and not dichotomies. We should think of paradoxa instead of dilemmata. So what does that mean? So a dichotomy is something that can't be true, really. I mean, either the one or the other is, but not both. And dialectics means probably you are not seeing it correctly because you are missing a structure above it that makes both true. And the same is with paradoxa. Paradoxon is something that we think is not logically possible, but still is there. So paradoxa, the word means it's against the teachings. It doesn't mean it's against logic. So if something seems against our knowledge, for example, our scientific knowledge, it might nevertheless be possible. So, and the dilemma is something that can't work. The dilemma is we go left or right, but not both. This is literally what the word means. It means that you are on a crossroad and have to decide, and you can't have it both. So usually, this is what Kuosa argues, in future studies we think of the world in the future as being at these crossroads, and we have to take a path. And there are things in the future that we know already that should not take place. However, he says, maybe we should accept these paradoxa, these things that we think are not possible, but maybe they are, and include them. That is a bit like in the example with the light cones, where you have the probable, the possible, and so on futures. And what Kuosa argues is don't focus on the probable or on the things even that you might want. Just take it all and then look at what comes out of it. And what he says in particular is that if you go that route and this traditional route of avoiding dialectic, avoiding the paradoxa, and thinking of that as dilemmata that you actually choose and then stay on that path, that you will confuse correlation with causality. Correlation is something we look into the past. For example, we say in the past, like in the 19th century, or I don't know, I mean, even until very recently, you just count how many women got a degree in universities. And then you say, well, in the future, that will just be the same. You explain the future by how the past was and say, well, that is just how it is. Women don't get degrees. And that's, of course, wrong. We see that it's totally contingent. I mean, we know why that happened, because there was sexism and still is. So this is a false causality. The causality is not in gender, the causality is in society making gender a criteria for succeeding in university. And it is very easy, in particular in the humanities, to confuse these things. Because if you do empirical social science, you always look back. You can't look forward, obviously, and you can't even see the present. If you ask people, what did you buy last year? I mean, of course, you don't know what they will buy this year. It's only a guess that they might somehow be consistent in their buying patterns. But there is disruption. I mean, if you ask people in 2005 if they would ever buy a smartphone, they would just have looked at you and say, I don't even know what that is. And 3 years later, everyone knew, and everyone says, yes, I might actually buy one. So looking in hindsight will never create foresight. So this is the plea of Tuomo Kurosa for having more dialectics. So the word dialectics is very ancient. It is a Greek word, and it means, dialectikai means to have a conversation. So that's basically it. And if you ever looked into Greek philosophy, like the dialogues of Plato, written about 2,500 years ago, or 2,400 years ago, where Plato writes about his teacher Socrates, then that's exactly the way they philosophize. They lie down on their symposion, which means just lying in your dining room together and having a meal, and then they talk. And one person says something and the other person says, that's interesting, let me think a bit further of that and ask you some questions. So this is dialectics. It is leading a conversation. And from this conversational approach, it's very narrative in a way, very dialogic, comes the philosophy of dialectics. So the pre-Socratean philosopher Heraclitus is credited with first using dialectics as a philosophical concept. So, for example, in his famous quotation that struggle is the father of all things, so he uses the word polemos. Polemos means we have that in polemic still in English. So polemos means war or struggle or fight. And he says that is the reason we got forward, is that we have things in our minds that we fight with and that we oppose towards, and then we make sense of it in the end. So the world is full of the contrarian. It is much less full of things that are contradictory. Sorry. So now to go a bit into this philosophy, I mean, believe me, it will come out with a nice toolbox for coming up with stories. So those of you who had logic or philosophical logic know what I'm telling about now. It is called the logical square. And it makes a point what is actually dialectic. So we have some property P. For example, P is the students, the alumni of NYU Abu Dhabi. And then we have another property, S, that could, for example, be the alumni of Sheikh Zayed University. And probably these two sets are disjunct. So you are either in one or in the other, but you are not in both. And we have many things that are like that. I mean, for example, you can say, for example, my name is Jörg, that's my name. Or I can say my name is Charles. I mean, and if I'm not Jörg Charles, then either is true, but not both. So, so this is a typical situation in which we find many things in the world. So, and of course, opposite of that is that S is a subset of P. So, for example, S could be the alumni who later went to grad school. I mean, every alumnus who went to grad school is an alumnus in the first place. So that means all S are also P. So that's like, for example, to say for example, all Germans are humans. I was just thinking of my own countrymen. So all Germans are humans. I mean, that is clearly a true logical expression, and there is no doubt. And opposite of that, you would say, for example, no dog is a human. That is the other side. So behind that you have the contrary. So, for example, the contrary is I mean, there can't be true both. So either, for example, all S are part of, then it can't be the other. So I mean, there's many other things you might just also not know. I mean, like for example, S could be NY. So P is the alumni of NYU AD, and S is alumni who have a master degree in future studies. I mean, we don't know, I at least don't know if any alumnus, if any person who graduated from NYU AD ever went to grad school and to the future studies. So it could be that it is on the left, but it could also be that none exist. But I don't know. So this sentence, so putting these sentences together, contain information. So if I can resolve this question to say, well, this is on the left or on the right, then I know something. So let's go further and look at the situation where some S are outside P. So if, for example, if you say P is the students of NYU Abu Dhabi, and S is all students in the Emirates. And clearly some are in the intersection of the pool, but many are not. So if we look at these two expressions, the statement that we look at all students in the Emirates, then clearly it's true to say some students in the Emirates are not students of NYU AD. And now comes the interesting thing. This is the contradiction of to say that all are. So if you say some are not, you say in the same sentence in a way that the above, that all are, is not true. So this is a contradiction. This is the thing that we were told to look to avoid, because that's not how the future is built, so to say, as we will see. And we can make the same, of course, to say, well, some S are P, which doesn't mean all. It can be all, this is also true, but if I just say some, then I know that it can't be that none is. So these contradict each other. And now it's the interesting things that we have a different kind of levels of contrarianism, and these are the interesting fields. So dialectics is not looking into contradictions, that's logic. Dialectics is looking into the contrarian and seeing things that contain information. So for example, if I say some are, it doesn't contradict that some are not, but it has a slightly different meaning. I mean, it is a bit like saying some swans are white is different to say some swans are not white, or some swans are not black. So some swans are not black, for example, doesn't say that the others are white. They could be green or red or whatever. So and likewise the other. So this is the contrarian, and the contrarian is where we have to look for dialectics. to make the square complete, you call it a subaltern relationship when you have, like, for example, these universal claims, like all SRP. Then of course it's also true that some are, but it's never true that some are not. And if you claim no SSP, then you know some are not, but you know that never some are. So this is the logical square, and if you think of building futures, you could think of events, of things going on to arrange it that way. We are not in a philosophy course here, so this is not meant to teach you the depth of the logics of statements. It is really just to provide you with scaffoldings for coming up with interesting ideas. So if we go a bit into the history of futurism, I mentioned Ossip Flechtheim. Ossip Flechtheim is probably the first systematic scholar of futurism, and Flechtheim says there's basically three levels of thinking about the future. So first is gnosis. This is when you think that the world is predetermined, and you can, with some divine intervention or some other, or magic or whatever, gain true knowledge about the future, because the future is already fixed. So this is the typical oracle thinking. You have an oracle, and the oracle tells you what the future will be. So it's the first way people looked into the future. The second is military strategy. The difference is, in military strategy, you never assume that you know anything really about the future. You just say, well, if I do this, this outcome will be very likely. So it's the idea that the future has probabilities that I can assign, and then I can multiply the possibilities with the expected losses. Because when I go here, I will lose 3 ships. When I go here, I will lose 10 ships, with a likelihood of so and so many percent here or there. And then you choose whatever gives you the better outcome. So that's the military strategy, and that was basically how futurism, also in the corporate world, was done until the 1960s. And Flechtheim already in the 1940s starts to see future studies, futurology as he calls it, as something different, as something that is meaningfully thinking about the future in a purposeful way. So he says that the first goal of futurism should be preventing wars and guaranteeing peace. And the second is working against famine and poverty, against oppression, enhancing democracy. And then, that is really interesting and very early, he said, basically to achieve the first 4 goals, we need to end extortion of nature and think environmentally. And finally, I mean, these are more like spiritual. We have to de-alienate, we have to make people comfortable with each other again. We have to kind of overcome the problem of the industrial mass society and create a truly human. So this is his program, and out of that, over time, comes, so to say, the dialectic approach towards futurism. So this nice slide I also took from the Finnish paper. It's kind of there's a lot of things going on. So you see, for example, I mean, a bit what I just said. I mean, this prediction thinking is how the kind of magical is usually called. So you think that you have control over the future out of some magical or divinated knowledge. And then in the Second World War and after comes this management where you think of control. I mean, control is something different than knowledge. I mean, control is like I control the flow of water if I turn the faucet on or off. And control in particular is a system of feedback that turns the water off and on automatically. For example, the toilet flush is the most commonly used example of a control system where we have kind of this buoy inside that shuts off the valve and by that shuts off the flow of water once the tank is full. So this is this management thinking, this is the strategic military thinking of the 60s and 70s. And then comes kind of a very esoteric thinking, I'll come to that a bit later, in the 70s and 80s that has a lot of influence in kind of environmentalism, but also in the strange spirituality that in the West took the minds of so many people that you think, oh, everything is connected, and you know the whole universe, and and there's ancient knowledge that we can tap into. I mean, I'm making fun of that now, but I mean, if you read these things now, I mean, you really wonder what people were thinking, and so a bit less funny, so to say, is that you think of things as huge systems of interconnected parts. And people working in that way were, for example, the so-called Club of Rome. The Club of Rome was an elite think tank of scientists and politically minded people who would come together and would say, well, let's just make a model. I mean, they knew already, okay, the world will fall apart. I mean, everyone at that time was thinking that would happen. So first of all, oil crisis. The OPEC just started to become a cartel to sell the oil at much higher prices than they used to the West. And in the West, everyone says, oh God, we will have no oil because the sheikhs at the Gulf, they will just switch it off. I mean, of course, thinking back at that time, it is just what did the West think? That they get it for free? I mean, all the richness of this region, just take it because why not? So this is the colonial thinking that at that time in the 1970s for the first time got really challenged. I mean, it's really like people sitting on their sofas and thinking, how dare these people in the UAE or in Saudi Arabia to not sell us the oil at a very cheap price? I mean, how could they? And so clearly people at that time thought, oh God, yeah, and at some point they will just only sell it to the Soviet Union or whatever, and everything will fall apart. And then there was the Cold War, the Soviet Union was there, everyone would think that the nuclear war was imminent. I mean, that was actually the case. So you would actually each night go to bed and think that you would become incinerated overnight. Which at various times almost happened. And then, of course, was the civil use of nuclear power, which also was very dismal, and people saw, all the dangers of it. And then, of course, environmentalism, like the acidic rain, the sour rain from the burning coal in particular, that killed so many trees, and another environmental problems that started to become seen in people noticed that happened. And so you think of the world as a big system and everything is connected, and you try to make sense of it. And the Club of Rome, for example, they made this very crude model where they say, well, this Malthusian model is really like Thomas Malthus saying consumption of raw material and energy rises and rises and rises, and we have more and more and more and more people living on the earth, and that will just end in disaster, and in in the late 1980s or early 1990s the world will just be uninhabitable. And if you look into this model now, I mean, it's really amazing how influential it became. I mean, thinking of how very simplistic it was. It's a totally reductionist thing. And if you, I really encourage you to read into these ideas of the end of growth. This is the famous book, or limits of growth, actually. This is how it's called. So you can't grow infinitely. I mean, that is of course true, and therefore the growth concept, economic growth in particular, but also population growth, naturally leads to disaster. Not everyone at that time was like that. For example, there's another idea to cope with the limits of growth, is to say, well, it will just not grow like that, it will not grow like the S-curve, and at one point there will be scarcity. And scarcity will not lead to disaster, it will lead to some kind of equilibrium that is very uncomfortable. Like, for example, I mean, today we would probably say climate change will not totally wipe out humanity, but it will lead to this kind of equilibrium of disasters that will automatically reduce people's carbon production, because the economy will just be no longer that strong, and so on. So this is the system thinking side. It's this idea of ecology. Ecology means that you have a system in which things are connected with each other, depending on each other. And that is the future studies, in particular then in the 1980s. At the same time, a totally absurd colonialism took place. A colonialism that was not noticed at that time, but now, I mean, if you read critical assessment of future studies of the time, and people are really angry about that. So, for example, there is the very popular writer Fritjof Capra. So, Capra wrote all these books. So, Capra went to India. And kind of had this, I would say, trivial knowledge about Hinduism that he probably read in some books, and then he suddenly said, "Oh yeah, now I understand the world." So the world is like we learn from Hinduism and the Hindu cosmology that all makes sense. That's like quantum physics and so on. And then he writes these books speaking about the future, totally appropriating in a totally absurd way other people's culture. So I'm usually not so strictly critical of appropriation. I mean, I enjoy things from other cultures, so to say. And looking around here in the Emirates, I see that many people do. I mean, there is really a joy in inviting people from other places and learning from them and trying to do things like they do. That is the good side of appropriation. But I mean, the worst that you can do, I mean, of course, is real colonialism. You go and just plunder. You take the things and put it into your museums, for example, at home. I mean, that's basically what the Europeans and the Americans did until very recently. So this is the classic plunder. But there's an intellectual plunder as well. You go somewhere and say, well, their music is actually great. Let's just take what I want and do it myself, without understanding any context or spirituality or so. And a lot of what was going on in the 70s and 80s in future studies, as in other fields of humanities, was kind of this super naive thinking that people in other places have some kind of mystical knowledge about the world that you can actually also take and then make sense of it, but in the real way. Because one thing is, of course, that the people writing in the West always claimed that, I mean, while the people somewhere else, I mean, they're religious, but in the West we are scientific. So it was not before the, I would say, like mid-90s or so that was really criticized. Also, I mean, the people in the West finally saw that as a deep flaw in this thinking that by accepting other people's culture, that would already be okay. That would be already kind of post-colonial, but it is not, because it requires also that you accept other people's knowledge as genuine and the context in which the culture lives. And that didn't happen at that time. So there was a lot of naive kind of blurring of the ecological ideas in Europe and the US with whatever they would find in other cultures. I mean, be it the Aztecs or Maya, or be it Hinduism or Buddhism, or whatever they would find, and it was totally random, you would say, well, that is actually very interesting, let's just take it in our theory. So, and since we are talking here about building kind of our own narratives or so, I can only tell you, this seemed to be a good approach to come up with things that really sell well. Because these books all were bestsellers. I mean, Capra was in the bestsellers. When I was a teenager, it was still totally venerated by people the age of my parents. Yeah, so this is then the kind of time of ecological future studies, and then I mean, here we have the claim, so to say. Now let's finally end up in dialectics, think of systems as being kind of paradox and embrace paradoxa, and also, I mean, this is the design thinking, the speculative design. Let's make the future proactive, and proactive. The word proactive is really a weird one. It's actually what's called a pleonasm. It's actually too much. I mean, either you are active. I mean, you can't be more than active. I mean, the pro, what does that mean? I mean, okay, you can take counter action. That means you take action to prevent something, but pro-action is a word that is kind of made up. Doesn't matter. We understand what they mean. So we have our desired future, and we think of how to get there and propose a path to reach the desired future. Well, so I mean, I think this is a nice kind of layout. So you have all the futurism and future studies here in one chart, and so I think that whatever you find interesting, you can take and repurpose. I mean, generally, I found a quote that summarizes all of it in a way. By the future study scholar David Snowden, who says the key error in the West is that it is control-based thinking. So you think that foresight and the pursuit to control something is kind of the same. And so I think that there is some truth in that. So the future studies, I mean, despite all these lineages or so, actually never got rid of this strategic foresight thing that we covered in the second and third video. This corporate way of seeing growth and these strategic trajectories. Well, I want to stay a bit in the field of logic and come to two dialectic thinkers that kind of are on the opposite side of futurist dialectics. So first is Karl Popper. Popper comes from originally inspired from the Vienna school, so very analytic, very logically minded philosopher who saw himself strongly, I mean, ideologically opposed to dialectics. I mean, Popper really hated Hegel. I mean, he wrote a whole book how bad Hegel was. The book is really also very bad. It's really not worth reading, but it's the Open Society and Its Enemies. That is the title of the book, where he really kind of just rants and rants and rants how bad Hegel is and how bad the whole idea of dialectics is. However, the interesting thing is that Popper's main contribution to philosophy of science is The Logic of Science, this book that is totally dialectic. So what Popper says is that knowledge grows gradually. So we have something and we falsify what we know and make it better. And you know that, of course, from statistics and other empirical sciences, it's called induction. So you have a hypothesis. For example, some NYU AD students get a master's degree in future studies. And how would you assess that? I mean, you just ask. You make a study. You can't ask everyone. I mean, they're scattered all over the world, but you can draw a sample and then just look if you find one. And your hypothesis might be, it's called the zero hypothesis, that you say no student of NYU AD ever studied future studies, and then you ask until you find one. So Popper in particular thought of the black swan as the example. So you never think that you actually know that all swans are white. You have that as a hypothesis that you constantly challenge. You say no swan is not white, and then you look until you find one that isn't, and you say, well, exactly, now we know we were wrong. And this leads to kind of a gradual improvement of knowledge. I mean, you think of knowing something and then you make it better. And I mean, at Popper's time, physics in a way looked like that, for example. So you have a knowledge of physics, like, for example, Newton, the mechanics, and in a way, mechanics is not really well suited to understand thermodynamics. And so in the 19th century, or electromagnetism, in the 19th century, people knowing Newton's theories came up with explanations of thermodynamics and electromagnetism. What, however, kind of this thinking in incremental improvements totally clouds is, if you think of future studies, is anticipating things that actually throw out your whole idea edifice. And this is what Thomas Kuhn and his successors saw. So Thomas Kuhn says models get improved until people no longer believe in them. So this doesn't mean that the model is true or false, but it says that there is belief in the model. And Kuhn would look into physics and would say, well, there is Newtonian physics, and it's true in the 19th century that was gradually improved until people, in particular Albert Einstein and Max Planck, came and would say, actually, the whole model is wrong. It doesn't work that way, and threw it out of the window. And a lot in science is done that way, actually. But it implies that there is belief, and that is not knowledge, and beliefs are formulated in the society. So this idea of revolution, that means you throw out your whole previous knowledge and build anew, implies that there is possible otherness. So this is the first step to acknowledging that there is a social construction in it, and that means that you have to look at other societies, at other belief systems in time. I mean, look into your own society in the past, and also understand people in other parts of the world. Also, that requires you to acknowledge diversity, because a lot of science might just be the way it is because it's all men. So this is things that would never come out of Popper's dialectics. It really requires the acknowledgement of a multitude of contrarian truths. And this is the connection to dialectics. You acknowledge that there is a knowledge outside the white male knowledge. And not particularly because people have different bodies, but maybe just because society puts people into different buckets, and by therefore the assessment of the world of people is very different. And finally, you think of, and that led then to the 1980s, a boom in ecological thinking, that you think not in an economical way. Economical is this strategic way that you say, if I do this, the outcome will be that. So I choose this path. This is the way of the dilemma. Either I build the new power plant or I don't. Either the power plant runs on coal or it runs on oil, and so on. And by thinking economical and in these dilemmata, you miss the connectedness of things, like the influence that it has on other systems and how it might loop back and how it might change in time. So these are the classic dialectics. And I found in the book a very nice explanation of how to think of dialectics, in future studies. So this is a 15th century English poem that's totally great in describing what we want to do. So the poem goes, "The law locks up the man or woman who steals a goose from off the common, but leaves the greater villain loose who steals the common from under the goose." I mean, this is, of course, a very early form of criticism of capitalism. So the common is the piece of grass that everyone owns together, and everyone, or no one owns, and everyone has the right to use. And of course, it's super easy, to observe someone stealing an animal from that meadows. However, what happened in exactly that time, in the 16th and 17th century in particular, then, is that all the common in England was transformed into pastures. So it was changed from everybody's property into the landlord's property. And you don't see that at first. And so the funny point here in that paper is to say, well, there is. So we have two parts. So in the humanities, you can look at things in two ways. You can have the type, the goose from the commons study, that is looking at the details, but keeping kind of the rest ceteris paribus, to not change the setting, but only see individual people's actions. Or you change that the other way around and have the commons from under the goose studies, which is the broad thing. This is kind of the Marxist or other ideological approaches, where you say we can't really look at criminality unless we understand the economics that lies behind that as the superstructure. So, and dialectics is kind of making sense of the two. It's kind of bringing these two things that happen at the same time together and understanding them at one. So the claim here, again from the same Finnish paper, we just say that ideas change. And there is an idea in the world, for example, capitalism, and that evolves over time. And ideas are interrelated, so you can't think of, for example, post-capitalism without thinking that capitalism exists, or think of colonialism. You can't think of a world beyond colonialism, because you can't just push colonialism away. Coloniality will just be there. And this is why the word coloniality, as far as I understand, becomes more and more used instead of post-colonialism, because there is nothing post. It will never go away. Maybe in 1,000 years, but not in any reasonable lifetimes. So this is the idea that the ideas change, people overcome ideas, but they stay connected to each other. And ideas tend to contradict. And then listen carefully, because it might just be contrarian and might actually make sense to see two things at the same time. To, for example, see identity has two sides, for example. Identity is admitting that people identify as someone other than themselves. That's the idea of identity politics, for example, that you say, for example, I identify as a man or as a woman. So there is a concept above me that I identify with. Hegel would have called that the spirit, and the Geist. And on the one hand, you can say, well, I mean, if we want to achieve equality, we have to end that. We have to make people truly equal so that it doesn't matter. On the other hand, as long as these identities have power, for example, by sexism or racism, as soon as you just say, well, we just don't want it anymore, they will not go away, they will just become invisible. So this is exactly this kind of contrarian relationship that the identity and universality have as concepts. You may as well believe in the universal equality of people and think of people being genuinely equal and still need identity, for example, to bring that forward. And dialectics means to reconcile these two topics with each other. So, and build your future on these kind of dynamics. And I found, I mean, two very funny so we have the dialectic inquiry system. This is basically what I try to do. I mean, kind of thinking of, there's always kind of these various contrarian things and then kind of making sense of it, kind of bringing it together with something bigger. And a very good way of doing that is being the devil's advocate. So someone says something and say, no, that's not true. I mean, you don't need to do that, I mean, directly, but thinking. So you read, for example, someone says, well, we have the post-oil economy soon. The cars will all become electric and so on. And you say, well, no, I don't believe that. Let's just assume that's not true. What would come out of that? And then you see suddenly, I mean, hopefully, that maybe you can come up with an interesting future in which kind of both sides are not really true. So this is exactly the opposite of coming up with a future where Elon Musk sells everyone Tesla. I mean, that's kind of the causality, that's the dilemmata future. Where you say either everyone will have combustion engine cars or everyone will have electric cars. So the question is just, how would the world look like where neither is true? I mean, for example, the world could just be zero cars. I mean, there is just no cars in the future. That would be an interesting idea. How would that look? And so on. And I mean, coming back to Hegel, that's from another article. So this is why dialectics in future studies. So a bit kind of the trivial Hegel approach would be, so you analyze where you are. I mean, you look here, like there, so there's combustion engine in the petrol industry, there is electric cars with all its problems. So that's, you analyze the situation, then you look back in history and think of how other things, like for example when the steam engine came, or when the cars replaced the horse or whatever, I just make that up now. And then you create your visions in the future and describe how these visions, knowing what happened actually until now, could come out. So, and I think this is actually, that's actually a very nice approach. So you think of, for example, a future where there is no cars, or a future where all cars are electric, and say, well, how will that actually happen? And try to organize, and by that, of course, also challenge it. I will now leave the Hegelian dialectics in future study and come to a second line of thought that I find particularly meaningful in coming up with an approach to envision the future. It was published in, maybe published is the wrong word, it was put forward in talks and interviews by the media philosopher Herbert Marshall McLuhan. So McLuhan was a Canadian scholar. He was a professor for English literature in the University of Toronto. And in the 1950s, I mean, almost as a revelation, he read books by the French philosopher, by the French Jesuit philosopher, Pierre Teilhard de Chardin. So Pierre Teilhard de Chardin has is a super futurist theologian. I mean, as a scientist, he was an anthropologist and worked on evolution, so he can be credited, I think, for doing a lot of work to convince the Catholic Church that the Darwinian idea of evolution is actually true, and by that moved the Church from creationism to acknowledging biology as a science. But his books are much, much further reaching. So one idea of Pierre Teilhard de Chardin is that every tool that we use is an extension of our body. So he looks back into, I mean, seeing people from the Stone Ages and then seeing the evolvement of tools in different cultures, and says, actually what people do, for example, when they cook meals, is that they extend their digestion to culture. Because, I mean, cooked food is much easier to digest and much more nutritious, therefore, than just raw food. And so this is why people started cooking. It's instead of waiting that evolution, so to say, would make their stomachs better adjusted, people started to use culture to speed these processes up. And then, I mean, in a way, I mean, saying, well, and we have, for example, we have scuba gear. People can dive as if they would be fish. I mean, clearly, we didn't wait until we grow fins and so on, so we build our tools. And we have wheels as if we would have faster feet. And we have clothes as we would have a thick fur. So this is how humans adjust, not by mutation genetically, but by cultural evolution. So this is Pierre Teilhard de Chardin's idea of the extension of people. And Teilhard de Chardin was, I mean, a true Jesuit. I mean, he says, well, and that will lead at some point what he calls to the point omega. And point omega will be, so we will have, I mean, he died, I think, in 1948 or something like that, but he already saw things like the telephone and the radio will lead to connecting people with machines that think. And so everything will be connected, and the whole world will gain gigantic consciousness. And that is the point omega, because everyone becomes one with each other, and without being not longer themselves, but in addition. And this is then kind of when people turn into angels. So that's the final angelization of humankind. And McLuhan was very impressed by that. I mean, he read that and said that is exactly what is happening, because in McLuhan's time, new technology had just started emerging, and that was television. He says, well, television, that is so different from media that we had before that we have to consider a kind of more impact on it. And then he looked further into things and said, media are always extensions of people. So this is McLuhan's basic statement. So media is technology, but technology is the nature of people. Culture and technology is the same, and technology is an extension of people's bodies. It is part of our nature. So, and with that, McLuhan says, we have to look into the effects of new technology, of new media. Media and technology for McLuhan is the same. And think of what happens actually. And he tries to systematize. I mean, as said, I mean, McLuhan is is not so much a philosopher as a writer. So it is literature that he creates, it is narratives. So that is exactly what makes it so good for our purpose, because you can use the way McLuhan would philosophize about the future and think of it not as that he knows the truth. He would never have claimed that. But in the way, I mean, he was talking, and while he was talking, would make up stories how the future could be. He's a great storyteller. It's very nice to listen to him. He has a very good voice and is very well spoken. So I can only encourage you. I mean, most of the recordings you find on his website. So his son and together with the University of Toronto put up a big archive, and there's a lot of media studies still going on. So, and one of the things that McLuhan himself never published, but that was around always, at least in the 1970s, in his talks, was looking at developments in this tetrad, as he calls it. And the tetrad asks 4 questions. So a new technology comes, and the first question is, why does this technology actually prevail? So what does this new technology make better? What does it enhance? So that's the first. And the second is, on the opposite side, what that existed gets made obsolete by the new technology. So I think that it's very straightforward. You see, for example, the new technology like the car, and it's very easy to see how the car enhances speed and individual mobility. And what the car makes obsolete, I mean, is the horse carriage. It's also very straightforward. And then something comes back. So McLuhan says, by making something that was very dominant obsolete, it creates a space that opens up. A space that was not there for people before that. And with the car, I mean, now my interpretation, that could be, for example, the suburb or the kind of living outside the city. I mean, with the horse carriage, I mean, if you are not a peasant, you have to live in the city. There is no rural life for people who are not peasants until the time when you can actually travel at a significant speed into the city. So something that comes back is kind of going out into nature, into the rural area around the city. And then it's the question, I mean, to what does it flip? I mean, at what point, what is the final outcome of it? I mean, if you really push it to the extremes, and I mean, whatever you think of cars, I mean, you can think of what comes then, I mean, like self-driving cars, full robotic automatization, but also miniaturization of sensors, and all that we know now. I mean, like the smartphone even, I mean, a lot of technology in the smartphone was developed actually for cars, and so on. So that was my example, and McLuhan himself came up with several examples. So here you have one on cash. I put all the examples, a link to all the examples, the scans of the book into the syllabus. So I mean, clearly what cash money does, it greatly speeds up economic transactions. And what does it make obsolete? Well, it's obvious, also bartering. What comes with money, of course, is that you have to show what you have. I mean, it's the conspicuous consumption. Because, I mean, if you go to the market and directly barter, everyone sees that. But if you order something on Amazon, no one sees what you had ordered. And then, I mean, what is the end of money, so to say, that is virtual money, that is the credit card economy. I find it really interesting. I mean, thinking of that, he came up with that like around 1970. I mean, I think he's pretty good at seeing things. Sometimes he's completely wrong, but often enough, it's really great to look into that and say, well, actually, that's not such a bad idea. Very interesting, I find also his idea of the database. So a database for him is this kind of electronic financial transaction system that was installed to handle credit card transactions in the early 1970s. So, and what he said, well, what the database does is it creates a cashless society. I think that's very interesting. I think that is the primary form that you see what happens is that the database is what makes cash obsolete. But here's as well, actually what makes it obsolete is privacy. So he saw already that being in a database means that you would lose the control, what people see about you. And then, I mean, the interesting things that kind of, I mean, like what comes back is kind of that people get super indebted, like really in the medieval times, and would probably find themselves in real trouble. And then in the end, what comes out of that, if you push it further, is a system of merits like likes or any kind of vanity metrics. It's becoming getting status by your credit score or any kind of score, of course. So I think this is a very nice way of thinking of how new technology does things. And what I've created here is an easy, I mean, this is my diagram. So you have the new technology in the middle, and then you have the four folds of the tetrad, and just a few examples. For example, if you think of print, so the invention of the movable type printing press. I mean, what it does is it enhances private authorship. And because before that there was no private authorship, it was monks in the scriptory in a monastery who would write and who would never know their name. This is how books were produced before the movable type. And now there is individual authors. The author becomes a job. I mean, you get a right in being a writer and get famous for that. And what comes with that, I mean, certainly is, or it comes at the same time, you could say, with the idea of competing individuals, that individuals have economic agency and are in capitalist competition with each other. So there's a lot to say for the printing press being kind of the first capitalist invention. So this is still McLuhan's example. So and what makes print obsolete? I mean, an interesting thing is the dialect. I mean, or the slang. I mean, because national languages emerge. So, for example, Luther's Bible translation, which was printed in huge volumes, created the German language. There was no German language before the 16th century. It is the book that creates it. And the same happens in Italy, for example, with the vernacular verse of Dante and others that was printed in the vernacular language. And that becomes very strong, in particular after the newspaper and other printed media were really brought into people's houses every day. So everyone would read the same language. And by that you dissolve these kind of group identities of the villager, of the person from a small community, because you build big nation states with it. And a typical McLuhan word is that it divorces the eye from the ear. So that's an interesting one, because I mean, what McLuhan says, I don't know if that is true, but it's kind of his way of storytelling. That pre-literate people would sit together and would tell stories, and the stories would be very, so you would use a lot of rhetoric and sound. So it was acoustic, and with writing things it becomes very linear and totally optical, and that is of course the same in any alphabet. I mean, you kind of split things in time, and we have these small meaning compartments, be it phonetic or be it logogrammatic, So, and clearly, I mean, what that ends, so to say, is the manuscript, and it is the industrially produced literature. And now comes the interesting thing that McLuhan says what it retrieves, so what comes with it. So tribal elitism, so you have suddenly academic elites and papers being published in language that is so complicated that no one understands them except if you really work in that field. The charm circle is the same in a way. I mean, yeah. So the referral, CF, and the neck verse. It took me a while to understand what McLuhan means by that. So the neck verse is what you say from the gallows. And traditionally in England, if you did the neck verse right, and it's called neck verse because you have the rope already on your neck, then you could get away without being hanged. And the neck verse would usually be quoting Psalm 51, which says, "God have mercy upon me according to your heartfelt mercifulness." And by that, a person would hand themselves over from the secular court to the clerical court, which was much more generous in their sentences, and so there is a complicated jurisdiction behind that. And this is what McLuhan says happens now. As you have the neck verse, I mean, I would say the neck verse is something that you Google. I mean, no, you know, people quoting the Psalm 55, they would not even know what that means. They'd never. They are not theologians. It was just common knowledge. And if you say that on the gallows, then you will get away probably. And in the same way, I mean, this is like we Google. So we Google things and quote them totally out of context and hope that they make sense in our writing. Just a few more examples. So that is, I think. I think it's my example. I forgot if that was McLuhan's example or mine, or maybe it's kind of I took the Xerox example and thought of it as digital print. So I mean, what does if I have a laser printer or so? I mean, I did, or even just produce PDFs. I mean, incredibly much speeds up the process of publishing, and it makes obsolete the assembly line book. So now I can print books on laser printers almost at the same price as big publishing houses would print books in millions of circulation. So you know that from the photo book. So you can print a photo book and go to the supermarket or drugstore and print that out in a nicely bound format. And it's actually not very expensive. I mean, you can make your own coffee table books with beautiful art in it, with all your photography or whatever. So you don't need a publisher to do that anymore. And by that, everybody can become a publisher. I mean, like on the internet, everyone can write their blog and you can print it out and so on. And I think that was a McLuhan thing with the committee. So what that brings back, however, is kind of that the writing tradition and kind of that homogenizes everything and that everyone speaks the same language and what they write gets in a way obsolete, and back comes kind of an oral tradition, maybe the podcast. Another one, I mean, we have the copyright that was introduced in the worldwide in the early 20th century, as predecessors in the 19th century already. I mean, what it does is enhance private authorship because I get paid for my work even if I don't publish it myself. And what it does is, of course, it creates a bourgeois creative. So the bourgeois artist is paid for their work. And what does that make obsolete is that only people who are rich enough do nice things. I mean, that was the thing all over the world. It's the same everywhere, that people of privilege could afford to pay their children to make art. So often artists are from very privileged backgrounds, or I mean, or people who like art in a way. And so that's called the dilettante, the aristocrat, amateur enthusiast. And it was also true for scientists. I mean, like people like Charles Darwin, when he was a gentleman, and by that he could afford to just travel for 5 years with the Beagle, the ship around the world. I mean, why not? Why not go onto your colonial adventure? So this is the thing, however, that copyrights kind of pushes out, because suddenly these people lose their privilege to some extent. And what it reverses into is, of course, cease and desist orders. It makes knowledge less accessible. I mean, you see that that more and more copyright is used to take things down. The publishers force you to pay unreasonable sums of money, for example, to access what is published in academia, and make it less and less accessible to libraries. And I mean, I think in a way, I mean, what that flips into is kind of a scriptoric, clertic, scholar way. I mean, if you look at university libraries or so, I mean, you go there, I mean, really like in medieval times, because you can't have the things at home anymore. And then you could think of what is when copyright is over, when we end cultural commodity. I mean, what that makes, of course, immediately clear is that knowledge becomes incredibly accessible. Think of Wikipedia, for example, or Google. It makes it, however, obsolete to actually publish anything for a mass market, because you can't make money of it, because someone might just copy it and just everything is just free on the internet or doesn't get published at all. So this is, if you see, this is true at the same time, clearly. And what it reverses into, that you see very clearly, is forms of bricolage, sampling. Instead of creating everything yourself, you take what's there and make collages. Like, for example, in DJ music. You take what already is on records and reassemble that into your own creation. And in a way, what comes out of it also is that public space extends into the space of information, into the space of knowledge. That there is a common place where things are shared with everybody. And I mean, since we are not paid anymore, of course, what comes back is the dilettante. It's the self-employed blogger, so to say, the amateur. And I have another one that I came up with. So I wrote this when the short messaging services, text messaging, became 20 years of age. And you can look into that and wonder how much you agree or not. So what I see, of course, is that short messages greatly enhance the efficiency of communication. And by that, I mean, if you look at Facebook, Twitter, WhatsApp or so, I mean, it forms communities, really. I mean, there is a reason why these media are called community media. So, the text messages automatically lead to social media experience, but also, of course, to an increase in control, because there is no excuse if you don't come to your appointment anymore. You know, you have an appointment, let's meet down at the Palms, and everyone expects you. If you get late, if you run late, and you say, well, I will be here in 5 minutes. You can't say, I was stuck in traffic and I didn't make it in time, because everyone would expect you to text. So this is just one form of individual control that text messaging, of course, greatly enhances. So you are always responsible to tell other people and make them aware. And of course, the other way around is also true, that the authorities, of course, have control over you by reading what you write. What goes obsolete with text messaging, of course, is the pager. I mean, this kind of small device that beeps and then you have to call. that was still very common when I was young. You see that still in old television series or so, that people working in a hospital also have these beepers, and then they know that they're needed on that station. Also the voicemail, I mean, you don't expect people to leave voicemail anymore. That's really old-fashioned, because you can just write them a text message. What it also makes obsolete is the traditional form that still existed with email of correspondence. So that you don't write really emails and exchange that back and forth, because you have more a conversation with people than a correspondence. And what we definitely see with social media, that it is the major hit on any kind of news media. And 2/3 of Americans take their primary source of information from social media. And that's the same, I would say, in many, many countries in the world. So now, I mean, what is this kind of reversal that comes here? I mean, of course, we have memes, we have all the memes in short messages, and it started very early on. In the second or third message ever sent, you have already people using kind of the smiley emoticon and so on. I mean, so this is really old. And these weird abbreviations that you know usually from civil band amateur radio, where you have so LOL, for example. I mean, this is so laughing out loud, or Rofel, roll on the floor laughing. These things, I mean, of this meaningless kind of four-letter, and everyone uses that still after more than 20 years. Then, of course, we have a kind of hashtag, and then whatever you hate. You have the whole cancel culture that you say, well, don't want that, go out. And you have even revolutionary movements like the Arab Spring, Spanish Revolution, so people gather around social media, organized resistance. And of course, big data. Big data was mainly pushed through by social media, by messaging services, because traditional database systems were not able to handle the traffic. And so you have to come up with something new, and that was the big data thing. And of course, you have the reversal. You have people who opt out and say, I don't want that, I want my slow media, I want to sit and read books and so on. So, and what comes back, things that were completely lost in newspaper, in television, in particular in television, that is communication that's like a verse. If you look at Twitter, much more than WhatsApp or so, in Twitter, I mean, the constraint of characters that you use lead to a very laconic way that people talk. I mean, of course, you can make fun of it and say, well, that is just people, it's just gibberish also. But I mean, you find very poetic conversations on Twitter where people condense what they say really in a verse, like in a poem, and use a lot of metaphorical terms, because metaphors also condense meaning. So that I leave you, so to say, with all the material. I've put all the examples that McLuhan has into the slides. You find them online, and I invite you to read that. So with that, I hope I could introduce you a bit into dialectic thinking. Don't take it too seriously, I wouldn't. Just use it as a way of narrative, of narration creation, and to broaden your view on the future, not to so much get stuck on certain tracks. Avoid thinking of dilemmata, more think of things that can be true at the same time. Think in a contrarian way, so someone says something and someone says something else, and say, well, that is probably both interesting.